Ahoy there, jabronis. Welcome to Create and Destroy. I'm your host, Dan Donnarumma, and this is episode number 23. Really excited about today's episode. I have a very interesting individual that I got to sit down and have a conversation with, Jordan Morrison from All Your Sisters. I appreciate Jordan taking the time to speak with me. It was a super freaking busy and long day for both of us, but we were able to make it work. I was really excited to speak with Jordan. He's a very interesting individual. Before he and I sat down and spoke, I got to read up on the fact that he was an EMT and a paramedic at one point, and that he also grew up in a fundamental Christian household. So I was really interested in having a conversation about those two topics and being able to learn a little bit about those experiences and discuss how those affected and influenced him as a musician, as an artist. So that was really cool to be able to learn about those points of his life and how they have affected him as a musician. We also got to talk about All Your Sisters' upcoming album Trust Ruins, which is dropping on April 12th. You could pre-order it from the Flenser, so you should absolutely get on top of that. As always, being able to learn about what goes into creating an album, maybe themes that are being discussed, that sort of stuff. I always am super excited to be able to speak with an artist about that, and that's something that Jordan and I definitely discussed. So let's get right into it. Here is my conversation with Jordan Morrison of All Your Sisters. Jordan, how's it going, man?
Good. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing very well. So before we get into talking about All Your Sisters, I saw that you were recently in Harry Potter World, and I wanted to talk about that. So I think that's so awesome. So was that your first time going there?
Yeah, for sure.
Did you like it?
I enjoyed myself. It was kind of like a day off from everything that's been going on, so it was nice to not think about anything, really.
Nice. I have yet to go there. I'm a big Star Wars fan, so my wife and I were planning our trip to go to Galaxy's Edge and to Harry Potter World, so I'm super freaking excited.
Cool.
Was there something that you got to do there or experience in Harry Potter World that you really liked?
I don't know. I was kind of just taking in the whole spectacle. I mean, there's just like a million kids running around aimlessly with their wands, and it's just like everybody's in the zone. I'm not like the biggest Harry Potter fan, I guess. I kind of know about it or got into it. My wife made me watch all the movies before we got married. There wasn't enough time to read all the books. I just did the movies, but I had fun. It was just kind of nice to get away from normal everyday life. It was for my sister-in-law's birthday. So she and my wife are and their family is really into Harry Potter and the books and the series and all that. So yeah,
that's really cool. My wife is super into Harry Potter. She's read the series multiple times. We've actually done Harry Potter marathons where we didn't watch all of them in one day, but we've watched all of them in 2 nights. Yeah, I've got to get on the books because my wife is super into them and constantly tells me I need to read them.
Yeah, I feel you there too. If there was only enough time in the day,
Yeah, oh, totally, man. So let's start talking about All Your Sisters. And I figured let's start from the beginning. So when was it that you started thinking about creating All Your Sisters and started to think about this project becoming an entity?
I want to say it's probably back in 2010. The first shows I played as All Your Sisters was in the fall of 2011. I had kind of been running with that idea for a while. I had a drum machine. Basically, I was living in Reno at the time, and I just wasn't clicking musically with anybody for years. I was there for maybe 5 years, and I just kind of circled around quite a bit. It just was like the idea was, well, nothing's really working out, so why don't I just do my own thing? So I bought a drum machine, learned how to use it, and played some guitar to it, and that was the start. But it was built out of, I guess, some sort of frustration or a lack of finding like-minded people. Or there was plenty of people that were in all sorts of things there, but it's a small town, and it's it's like there were already bands, and everybody else that I met, it was like oil and water,
Was there other bands or other acts in Reno that were making music similar to All Your Sisters, or were you pretty much the only one in Reno kind of making that type of music?
At the time, I don't think there was really anybody, which is weird to say because it's kind of in a vein where it's not that obscure or anything. It's just there was some really good bands there. It was more like maybe a noise rock scene, and then a lot of hardcore and metal. But there was nothing really much in 2011 that had any sort of drum machine. Definitely no drum machine, and no kind of, I guess, post-punk vibe. So yeah, it was kind of weird at first. I played a few shows there. They were okay, but it seemed a kind of like a foreign sound to people there. Maybe it didn't to me. It just seemed, I was like, well, I don't know. I don't know why there wasn't anybody really doing that there, but that's kind of also why I left.
When you started All Your Sisters, was it just you, or was there other people that were a part of the band?
It was just me, but the plan was to have some people in the band right away. I was like working in a few different projects at the time that were, I don't know, we'd play like a show or two, and then the band would dissolve or turn into something new. But I had a few things in mind, and then it just didn't work out, or people weren't motivated. So I was like, well, I guess I will play a few shows solo. I played with maybe one show before I left as a 2-piece with somebody else, and that was it. So it wasn't a solo project on purpose. It was just out of necessity, I guess you could say.
And were you in bands prior to starting All Your Sisters?
Mostly just nothing like notable, but a lot of, I don't know, just like messing around type of stuff. Like I said, it was kind of hard to find people that I was on the same page with. And originally I was a drummer, so at the time there wasn't really anybody who needed a drummer as far as like doing music that I was interested in. So I taught myself guitar, and I was trying to find other people to join. But yeah, it was like I'd been in a bunch of whatever bands for many years, but nothing that got anywhere seriously.
Wow. So you start, how long were you drumming for?
I was actually, that was my first instrument. I went all the way through, middle school, high school. I was a percussionist, did marching band, concert band, all that stuff. So that's kind of the musical background for myself.
I have tried teaching myself guitar, and what I very quickly realized is I could only get to a certain level, and I just like peaked, and I was basically like maybe just above like a beginner level because I couldn't improve. So I'm very impressed by the fact that you taught yourself guitar and went from playing drums to playing guitar and making music. Was it tough learning curve for you, or did you pick it up fairly easily?
I feel like I'm still trying to pick it up, honestly. I think when you have the base knowledge of like rhythm, or you understand the concept of rhythm and how important it is to stick with it, that's a huge part that maybe, I don't know, you can't teach that to some people. They just don't understand it. But I had the rhythm part down. I knew a lot of how chord progressions worked because I also played xylophone and the marimba and stuff like that in high school. So I had somewhat knowledge of like the notes and the chords and rhythm. So it was just mostly a matter of muscle memory with the finger positions and things like that. Yeah. So I basically I went to Costco and got an acoustic and bought a chord chart and just practiced.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, that's probably where I messed up. Was I never bought any type of like chord chart stuff. I never looked up that stuff. Like every once in a while, maybe I'd like look up metal chords or stuff like that. So I was basically just trying to figure out like power chords and stuff, and I just totally could not get anywhere by myself. So I find that very impressive, man.
Well, the chord chart 2 thing I would say was it only gets you so far. You just kind of helps you like understand what like a standard position is. But I kind of threw that away pretty soon, and it was mostly kind of like what you were saying, just looking up tabs, from stuff you were hearing at the time, like, oh, I wonder how that works. And oftentimes when I was searching online, that's all I could find for the song was those tabs. So then I just was learning songs that way.
Yeah, I think the other thing too for me that I've learned is that it's only been recently that I've been trying to learn how to play other people's music. I never try to play other people's stuff. I always just kind of like pick up my guitar and just start playing, basically. So I've recently started being like, yeah, I need to start playing other people's music to see like what they're doing in parts that I really like. When you were starting All Your Sisters, who were some acts or some bands that were inspiring you and influencing influencing you in the sound that you were looking to create with your music?
All Your Sisters was kind of started out of frustration. So I had a drum machine because I didn't have the right drummer, I guess. So that sound kind of made it its own thing, but I was actually really more interested in, I don't know, like no wave and stuff from New York in the 80s. So I don't know, I was like interested in Sonic Youth sounding guitars and also certain noise rock. I don't know, like the Jesus Lizard and Scratch Acid and stuff like that. And I didn't really know what was going to happen, but once I started messing with the drum machine, then it kind of started to take on a life of its own, maybe. And some people say, oh yeah, no, that's kind of cool. It reminds me of like whatever, New Order or something. And I was like, okay, yeah, I like New Order. But I honestly didn't really know what I was going for at first. It was just kind of like I had some ideas with like words or things to write about, and it was basically kind of guitar music, noisy guitar music. I don't know, you can even grunge music, something over a drum machine. So I mean, I was like listening to like Mudhoney and like I said, Sonic Youth, and kind of diving deeper into that world. I had been listening to other stuff, but I was nowhere near playing that type of music. Maybe like kind of like the more the metal side of things. So I was like, well, I can kind of do this. So I guess this is the way the guitar is going to sound, and I'm going to have some sort of sequencer or drum machine to go along with it.
So you at least maybe had somewhat of an idea of kind of where you wanted to go, but the sound just kind of sort of came to life on its own as you were putting things together.
I would say that. Yeah, totally. It was more of like I was a beginner or a novice, and I really didn't know what the hell I was doing. And guitar was a fairly new instrument for me around that time. So I've been doing it like a couple years, but it was, I didn't really know what to expect. I was just like trying. Basically, I said, hey, let's see what I can do on my own.
So when you were starting, did you find it easy to make songs? Was it difficult for you, especially since you are now picking up a new instrument and learning as you're going?
Well, I had some stuff in mind with guitar, at least. When I had the drum machine and I started writing songs with that, I thought it was really easy once I got the hang of programming, and that was a new thing for me. I'd never programmed anything and never considered it. It seemed actually kind of awful and boring to me, but you learn that stuff and then you realize you can kind of compose something in this little box fairly quickly. The experiences I had before that it was just like a success trying to get 5 people in a room to get through one practice. So once I got the hang of the drum machine that I was using, it was all I needed was some time in an isolated room, and I could kind of get things going once I learned how to program. Because it also was kind of the history of my past history of doing like marching band and stuff. You understand time signatures, and so you can the drum machine had that, so you can just like set your time signature and stack patterns and then have certain variations. And it, not to say that like it was like easy and I was just like throwing out like songs every 5 minutes or something, but it seemed like some sort of thing that I could work with that made sense.
I've tried to compose beats in Fruity Loops. It's super tough for me, and it's very tedious, at least for me. I've never played drums, but I feel like I'd have an easier time at least putting together basic drum beats on an acoustic set as opposed to trying to compose something in like Fruity Loops. Do you feel that it's easier to make a drum beat on a drum kit, or do you think it's easier for you now to use your sequencer?
Well, for now, I think it's easier for me to use a sequencer. I haven't even touched a drum set. I don't even have a drum set anymore, actually. So I haven't played drums in a long time, but when I first started, I didn't think that it was going to really work out the way I wanted to. I liked playing drums myself, but there's a lot of little intricate stuff you can do with drum machines, quantization settings and swing and all those sorts of things. You can kind of get pretty crazy with it. So now I like it. And also I want to say back at the time of like when I was getting into it, early stages of AYS, it was annoying at first, kind of the rigidity of it, but then I started to really embrace it and I really loved it. And I liked the idea of it being exact, kind of this like militaristic exact tempo and time and beat and everything. And it was good. I guess right now I don't foresee ever really eliminating a sequencer. I like both acoustic drums and drum machines or sequencers mixed together.
Was it tough for you to kind of create the music that you were making early on and then figure out how to now translate that to being on a stage in front of people and playing live?
Early on, it was pretty basic. So I basically I played it the exact same way. Everything was much more minimal. Everything was composed on the sequencer, and then I happened to play guitar and sing, and that was it. And then later on, there's more band members, so they'd play a synthesizer or something, but it was the exact same. For the longest time, I was just like very kind of set on it, everything sounding the same, or like recording a live performance, performing those songs, and I wanted them to sound the same. So, but it was pretty minimal, I would say. Now with this most recent record, it was kind of the opposite. So that's a whole new ball of wax. I kind of focused more on writing, and then I said I'll figure it out later how to play it live.
And at what point did you start bringing other people into the band?
Probably a year after I started playing as All Your Sisters. Yeah, about a year. It was just, I'd met a buddy of mine, and he played synths and wanted to be part of the project. And so it was a two-piece for a while. So yeah, about a year after. I also kind of had I didn't, not that I hate playing solo, but it just wasn't really what I had in mind even from the beginning. Like I said, I had this other idea of having these other people that I was playing music with to join in. But I felt like at about a year of doing that solo, it kind of ran its course as it was in that form. Most of the sets were a lot of noise loops with a couple of songs only. And then when I added more people, then I feel like it became like there was more actual songs during the set, and had a drummer years ago also that we mixed in there too.
So even at that point, it was still primarily you composing and writing the music for All Your Sisters.
Yeah. That whole first album was almost done, and I had been playing most of those songs live as a solo thing. Even though that album technically, I guess the vinyl came out in 2014 or 15 maybe, and it was like the first thing was a tape release. There was some major gaps, I guess, in time, but I don't know, some of the songs you hear in Modern Failures were written in like 2012 or something.
I really, really enjoy that album. So with the songs and the themes of that album, what would you say you were delving into, and what were some of the emotions that record kind of delved into?
I had just started writing some stuff before I moved to San Francisco, and that ended up on Modern Failures, I think. But it was mostly when I first moved to San Francisco, and I was kind of just soaking it all in, and ran out of like all my savings that I had in like 2 months or something. And I was just kind of like, oh, I guess this is how it is. But I didn't wind up with getting a decent job for a while. So I just had a time to think and to, I guess, sulk and whine. And it was like, I had to do with a lot of self-pity and self-loathing. So I was like, what was it? I was crashing at my wife's flat in Upper Haight, and it was on its third story. So I would sit by the window when everybody else was at work, and I'm in between applying for jobs, just like looking out the window and feeling disgusted with myself and disgusted with the rest of the world. So I feel like Modern Failures was like a reflection of that time period. It was like a few months of just the sense of like, okay, this is what the real world is. Obviously I was like super sheltered and growing up in Nevada, and then like living in Reno, and like things are super easy there, or at least they were for me, and you just skate by, or at least I did at the time. And then it was like, okay, like San Francisco is gonna chew you up and spit you out, like nobody gives a shit, So it was just like me coming to terms with like reality, and like knowing that I had to hustle and just figure it out. And I didn't know anybody there. I had just met Liz, who was my wife at the time, like a 4 months prior. So I was pretty much all alone trying to figure out how to become an adult, or a responsible adult. And I'm not even responsible. I was just trying to stay alive, basically. It was like getting on food stamps and trying to figure things out. And I was just like really depressed, and I wasn't sure if I made the right move, or if I just felt really underprepared, but also underprepared for life. was a shock. So that's what that album is. It was just kind of a lot of looking outside of that window.
Wow. And so as you're saying this, I'm just thinking the title of that album is like a perfect reflection of that experience and those emotions then.
I guess so. Yeah. It was just more of a reality check for me. I'm not one that loves to get out of their comfort zone, and I like to prepare as much as possible for things. And I felt like I had prepared myself, but I was clearly like some wandering child, basically, not knowing what the hell I was doing.
So then when you reflect back on that time period of your life and that album, like what emotions come to mind when you think about that period of your life?
Lots of, I guess, anger. I'm not a very extroverted or loud person. I hold a lot of things in. I'm not super emotional. So it was the emotional release was that record, but there was lots of angst, self-loathing, and misanthropy. I would say those three those three things there for sure. And also there's like one or two songs on that album where I was kind of not figuring it out, but understanding that I needed to embrace that kind of chaos or uncomfortable feeling rather than just complain about it. Because kind of half of that record is complaining and half of it kind of putting myself in check and saying, or just telling myself like, get with the program or just wake up. Yeah, sure, you think life sucks, just like deal with it. It's just the way it is, stop whining about it.
Since you're an introvert and you kind of keep stuff close to the chest, then your music, I'm assuming then, is your opportunity to maybe purge some of those emotions or those thoughts that you might otherwise kind of keep inside.
Yeah, I would say music, even when I was in my teens, was a cathartic outlet. And now it's a little different because I've been singing for the last handful of years, and it seems to work better in that way as some sort of therapeutical thing. But yeah, it's always been a cathartic thing. I was a really quiet kid growing up, and anytime I was playing music, it was kind of like my time to just let it all go and kind of be free for a few minutes.
I'm a humongous introvert, man. I'm super introverted, and I'm also, I don't know if this might come as a surprise, but I'm also super shy. So sometimes it's very hard for me to, like you, kind of be open about emotions or feelings, which is kind of cool with the podcast, is that's stuff that I've been more willing to talk about. But music has always been, especially listening to music, has always been a very like cathartic experience for me, listening to music that delves into stuff that I'm kind of like struggling with or dealing with emotionally.
Yeah, same.
Yeah. So like when you started working on the next album, the follow-up album, Uncomfortable Skin, did you kind of take a similar approach to working on those songs as you did with Modern Families? Was it really a reflection on, your emotions and the shit that you're experiencing at that point in time? Or did you try to maybe take a little bit of a different approach at that point?
There was definitely one approach that was extremely different, but as far as the subject matter, I was definitely, I'd been in San Francisco for a few years, and it kind of worn me out. So I was definitely angrier. I think the music is on the Modern Failures is not as, heavy or maybe edgy. I don't know what right word to use than Uncomfortable Skin. Comfortable Skin was way more like raw and super stripped down in comparison. It was almost like demos. But the subject matter was more stream of consciousness and just like super, not super angry, but super frustrated.
I had read that growing up, you grew up in a household that was a part of the evangelical church. And I thought that was very interesting. Growing up, I grew up a Catholic. My mom is very religious, but I will say for me, and I don't mean to offend anyone that's listening, I feel fortunate enough that my mom didn't make me go to church. I went through communion and confirmation, but essentially after that, it was up to me if I wanted to continue to go to church. So, I wanted to ask you, what does religion or faith and organized religion mean to you?
That's a big question. I don't know. I was definitely forced to go. my parents kind of got sucked into this thing, this like kind of, I don't even want to say the name of the sect, but it was this charismatic evangelical church, and they had just moved to the Tahoe area, kind of like escaping reality. And they thought that we would have this like utopia in the mountains. And somehow kind of quickly after we moved there, maybe 6 months or something, maybe it was a year, my mom was working in the bakery, the supermarket, and somebody invited her to this like cool new thing, this new church, new way of whatever. And then she and my stepdad had Insta friends. So I'm trying to think the way I feel about it. I can only really speak from my experience. I don't want to say that all religions are bad or something, or I had a terrible experience, and there was a few people I grew up with, a couple of these girls who were about the same age as me, and we all just, I think, had a hard time letting go of the resentment from growing up in that church. It was very much a cult, a small, I don't know, the congregation was about size of 50, maybe 70 on a good season or something, depending on how desperate people were. But to try to answer your question, I don't know, religion's a weird thing, and I understand it's been around forever. It doesn't work for me. I don't subscribe to any religion. I'm not a member. I think it does help some people. Some people are like completely lost and don't know what the hell they're doing or need any sort of guidance, and there's, then it works for a while. It kind of fills that void for a bit, but I still just don't think it really sets you up for the real world. So I thought maybe looking back, like I'm not really one to have regrets, and maybe I wouldn't even be playing music or have this band if I wasn't in that church or grew up in that church. For a long time, I regretted that time in my life because I thought I just lost a whole lot of years. It was very fundamentalist, and you had to kind of live by the book. So I didn't get to experience a lot of things that my friends in school were. So no.
As a musician, as an artist, how do you feel that your experience growing up in that type of religious environment or in that church has affected you and your music?
Well, yeah, I feel like it was the first DIY show I was that I had experienced. It was interesting. Looking back, like I kind of appreciate the performance, and it was like every Sunday it was this crazy performance. Was this character up there, and so much going on. It was so theatrical. Just seeing that performance part, even though in that setting I just could never imagine being part of that. But I did enjoy the performance. It's kind of weird to say, but there was certain aspects that I just was kind of amazed. Maybe by the time I was getting in my teens, I was like, wow, this is like some really good, intense thing. If you kind of like compartmentalize it and put it aside as just a performance. But when, I don't know, like you feel like your life depends on it, then it's kind of something different. But yeah, it did have an impact because I was also, like I said, I played drums early on, or percussion early on in my life. My mom was part of the church band, and I was forced to be part of the church band. I played drums in the band and the church band off and on from like age 10 or 11, I want to say, something really early like that. So I was able to learn a few things. Some of those the people in that band were really good musicians, so I think that was helpful to learn a few things, I guess. And then growing up, I grew up in that church from age 7 or 6 to basically when I was allowed to leave. When I was about 17, I want to say 18. So there's a lot of things I remember that are helpful. A lot of the lyrics and subject matter and everything AYS has a lot to do with my religious upbringing and how I feel about that. So it's like, I don't know, if I really dig deep, there's just like tons of stories there or things to touch on. So it has, I guess you could say, helped. There's plenty of subject material from this like cauldron I can stick my hand into and find something pretty easily.
Well, let me ask you this: Are your parents still very religious?
Not as much as they were. They are both religious, and they both go to. I know my stepdad. I feel like they both go pretty frequently, but they're just maybe not as dumb or like not as naive. They kind of joined that place, that church, when they were in like a really rough, kind of vulnerable spot in their lives. I don't even, they kind of had tunnel vision or something. They just really didn't see what was going on around them. So it seemed like they were much more religious or much more strict back when I was growing up. They really kind of followed that fundamentalist regime that they were preaching. So a lot of cracking of the whip.
I guess I'm fortunate enough that even though my mom and my stepdad are quite religious and go to church, that was not forced on me after, because I'm trying to remember I'm trying to remember if it's communion you go through first and then confirmation, whatever it is. Whichever last one I went to, I basically was given the choice. And then after that, I was like, yeah, fuck this. I remember when I was really starting to question my belief in religion and kind of being like, I don't believe any of this. Is a very scary thought for me. And I was talking to my mom about that, and she was very upset by it, but was like, hey, that's your choice, man. If you don't believe in it and you don't want to subscribe to it, that's your decision. I remember at the time being like not super thrilled about how our conversation worked out, but in retrospect now, I'm just like, that's actually kind of cool that my mom basically allowed me to kind of pick what I wanted to do.
Good for you. That sounds good.
You brought up the fact that your parents mentioned like you being into rock music, and it just made me think, like, when you were growing up, what type of stuff were you into, and like did your parents accept the music you were into? And then it makes me think about, like, what about the music you play now? Do they know the kind of music that you play, and how do they take the type of music that you make?
Well, I guess to the start of that question, they were definitely not into the music that I was listening to when I was a teen, or it was around the time when I voiced some questions when I was in the church. I was, 12 or 13 or something. I was like, is that really how it works? That seems a little extreme. Does that mean I'm going to hell, or like whatever they thought of as hell or conceived it to be, just because of, A, B, and C? And around that same time, my mom, she got suspicious and searched my room and found mixtapes, and I had collected some stuff. It was like through friends, same as everybody, in the 90s. And she listened to a few things and just thought it was awful. So everything was gone one day. I had like dice and stuff like that from like Dungeons and Dragons, like all this like normal, boy stuff that you're growing up with. It's just like all vanished one day. And then I was apparently this heretic that they had to deal with. So they weren't into it, and the stuff that I was into at the time, we would make these like bootleg mixtapes off of watching skate videos and 411 video magazine or whatever. We'd collect all this stuff. So it was all that stuff. So that was like my favorite thing. I guess you can call it like old, punk rock, or they call it hardcore at some point back then too. Which so it was a lot of that stuff. There's Minor Threat, Fugazi, and Black Flag, and TSOL, and it didn't go over too well. So I was just much more careful after that, like hiding my music. Nowadays, you had asked about, like, nowadays they're supportive now. They weren't for the longest time, and even when I started with All Your Sisters or started doing some shows and touring, I feel like they still think I'm gonna like come around, and they kind of think of the music as like hateful, and why you gotta sound this way, or I can't understand anything you're saying half the time. So they don't really relate to it, or they can't connect with it, but they are supportive because they see that I put in a lot of hard work and I'm not just like partying every night kind of thing. It took them a while to really look past what they thought of, that music scene, I guess. They just thought of like stuff they saw on TV, in the 90s and the early 2000s. Just, it was just like, they thought of like Nirvana right away and Nine Inch Nails, and they just see people committing suicide or getting injured, and they just assume that everything's kind of lumped into that whole thing. They just didn't get it.
That's cool though that they're supportive of you now, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. I feel fortunate. I get, I think my mom and my aunt came to visit me in 2000, maybe it was 14 or 15, and they saw a show in San Francisco. They didn't quite understand any of it, but they gave me a hug after and said, cool. They weren't preaching to me or anything.
That's awesome. And then I also read that, shit, man, you worked as an EMT, which is wild. And I wanted to talk to you about your experience doing that type of work, because damn, that had to have been super heavy, and there had to have been some very crazy shit that you were experiencing on a regular basis. What made you want to get into that line of work?
Well, part of it was See, I actually took my first EMT class when I was 19, but so I didn't have much direction. I actually wanted to go to school for music at UNR, or University of Nevada, Reno. And it really wasn't encouraged by my family. They knew I was like into the rock music and all that stuff. So nobody encouraged me or wasn't going to help it with that at all. So I don't know. I was young and dumb and naive, and there's not that many jobs where I grew up, and I had been a lifeguard for a couple of years or something. And one of the firefighters who was a paramedic would teach our CPR class. And I had just, I don't know, talked with him. I'd seen him all the time at the pool I worked at. I was trying to find something, just some sort of trade, anything, just to like make some money and kind of keep my parents off my back. And it was like that. And it was like the other suggestion was, well, you're in my mom's side of the family. There was a lot of my aunts and uncles were cops. And I couldn't do it. There was like no way for a lot of reasons. So it was kind of like the middle ground, or it's like, well, I can please my parents and my grandparents and family. It's in a field that's kind of like connected in a way, but I feel like I'm actually helping people. So then everything's going to be good. And then I was also not a very emotional person and never have been. So I thought, well, maybe it would work, and it did. I did well, or I don't know, I continued with it. I kind of got sucked into that whole thing, and then eventually went to paramedic school and finished that, and then it kind of snowballed into a big, huge mess. There was a lot of pain and suffering on both sides, and on my part too. So it was maybe not the best idea. It was really naive. Later on, I realized I wasn't this kind of like savior, this helping trained person. It turns more into a thing of social work, almost like a different, version of that.
So let me ask you this. Are you still working as an EMT?
No, it's been quite a while. I don't know, 8 years. When I moved to San Francisco in 2011, if I'm getting that correctly, 2011, 2012, I was already removed from, or like I wasn't working as that anymore for at least maybe 2 years. So it was a 5-year chunk of my life in my early 20s, and it's been a while, but I remember it pretty clear.
What does working in that type of occupation, that line of work, when you're seeing people dealing with horrible accidents, horrible injuries, how does that affect you mentally, physically, maybe even socially?
I thought it affected me pretty strongly. Kind of weird, because at first, like I said, I thought it was going to be a good thing for me because I had the right personality, or I didn't really get fazed by stuff. But it definitely affects you. I don't think there's any way around that. You can't like unsee certain things. I had already been kind of familiar with death. My father died when I was 12, so I spent a good deal of time by his bedside, like the last 2 weeks of his life. So I kind of knew it already a little bit. But yeah, I thought the main thing I got from that, or that I realized later, was that job, for me at least, it like really desensitizes you to normal life. And at the time I was working, since I was like new, you don't get the prime shifts. You kind of just get what's available. And I was put on this shift. It was Friday through Monday, 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And that's like in my early 20s. And so I had this like separate life than most of my friends. They were going out and hanging out, going to shows on the weekend, and I was just like working these weird hours. So I kind of like fell deep into that world. And when you're working those hours, you kind of just relate to people that you see at the ER or other medics and stuff. Those are like your friends, and you get off of work and you go. Since this was Nevada, everything's open 24 hours. So we get off of work at 8 a.m. and then we go to like the bar and get a beer and get some food and then go home or something. So it affected you. I felt really isolated from the rest of the world, and I eventually wasn't really into that life anymore. But I was kind of stuck. I got a scholarship to go to paramedic school through the company I worked with in Reno, and it was part of the deal was if you take that certain scholarship, you got to work for them for 5 years. You sign this contract. So I was like, well, shit, I guess I'm going to be doing this until this contract is up.
Wow.
So, or else you had to pay it back, and it was a pretty good amount of money that I didn't have. So I just try to stick with it, but it definitely changes you. I think if you're smart and if you have access, or like if you're encouraged to get help with certain things right away, then maybe you're fine and you can kind of work through stuff. But I felt like I was on my own the whole time and kind of dealing with things in my own head, and didn't have the right resources at hand to properly kind of deal with them and process all the gore and all the, craziness.
The first night you're out, you're now officially a paramedic. You're in the goddamn ambulance. What was that like for you?
Well, by the time I became a paramedic, they kind of prime you for that. So it's like it's interesting transition. You got to usually work as an EMT for a while, and then once you get your paramedic certificate, you're like a probationary one for a while. So you're always stressed out. There's always something they're critiquing you on. So I guess I felt ready, but I do remember the first time I was completely out on my own and I had my partner, and you're just like, well, if something goes bad, it's all on you. Because when you're at these accident scenes, the paramedic has to delegate responsibilities. It could come crashing down, but generally you train a little bit, not enough, but like a little bit to kind of get by. And then oftentimes if you're maybe like a little bit shaky right away, one of the other, say a fire captain on scene might kind of help out. But you have to be ready. I was nervous for sure. I was definitely nervous this first month, being completely on my own and not having like somebody above me in the ambulance to help out or make the decisions. So it was like a huge weight on your shoulders, and you second guess yourself, and you're just constantly rehearsing scenes in your head and reading protocols and trying to memorize all this stuff and trying to stay composed, so you don't, because if you lose composure on scene, then you're very much you kind of lost everything. No one's gonna trust you or feel confident, and things aren't gonna get done, and somebody might die because of it. So you really have to kind of be ready. But I had worked a few years as an EMT before that, and I kind of eased myself in, so it wasn't as bad as maybe it could have been.
So it becomes very like robotic almost, right, for you?
Totally robotic. You're desensitized. You don't even flinch. You don't, it doesn't, there's no reaction. It's just like, this is how it is, most of the time or throughout the day. And there's no reaction from anybody on scene, the police, the fire department, whatever. It's like you've been on 1,000 calls or, who knows, 100,000 calls from 55-year-old fire captain or something, It's just, there's a dime a dozen. Certain ones shake you up a little bit, but most of them don't really. You kind of just move on.
Did your time as an EMT and a paramedic, did it change your view or your outlook on society?
It did, for sure. I went from being in that charismatic, evangelical, crazy cult church where it kind of, even though I didn't believe in what they were preaching, it still like lingered there in my head. This certain idea of what I thought life was like or about, and I was really sheltered. And when you work in that field on the ambulance, you're kind of exposed to the underbelly or like the underworld and everything, like just completely everything, the worst of humanity, the worst of social system, the worst of the way the mental health system works. You see all of the negative. You rarely see positive anything. So yeah, you get exposed. Yeah, I feel like I got really depressed pretty quick. I went from maybe feeling like I had a purpose, especially when I first started in that field. I was like, okay, I'm helping people. This is a good thing, to understanding that I really wasn't this helping hand maybe, or like this, I wasn't like going around saving people, the reality set in, and I realized I was almost like part of the problem. And you see how messed up the way later on I learned more about health insurance when I did some admin stuff, but you understand like the system a bit more, the medical system and how messed up psychiatric care is, and like I was just kind of disgusted in the world. Basically, it was the feeling of disgust. I felt like I just didn't care anymore. Basically, I was like, well, I'm just going to do this job until the contract's up, and I don't know what I'm going to do next. Maybe I'll do something in the medical field, but maybe I'll just go wander off in the desert or live in some weird rural area and just kind of keep to myself. I was pretty disappointed in the world as I found it to be. There was no more mystery. It was just kind of the charm was gone, and I was like, who gives a shit? This is terrible. Like nothing matters kind of feeling. And it was really hard to kind of get out of that. That's why, and I don't know if it's like this still, I'm sure it is, but a lot of people in that field have drinking problems and drug problems and have to escape all the time because no one wants to like face it. It's just like, it's terrible.
And so, shit, man, I'm just thinking, like, how did this then affect your music and all your sisters? Because I have to imagine that at least to some degree, there's some stuff that maybe kind of pops up in your music, right?
For sure. I'm not literally or like in that literal sense of reciting some journal that I wrote after a call or when I got home from work or something, but it definitely pops up. I would say between what I was learning about myself at the time and just dealing with life, and then the whole religious background mixed in with that, and then me, 10 years later, processing everything in a different way. Those three things is, I would say, what the subject material always is and probably always will be for the project. Yeah, I can't think of anything else. Those I feel like those three things, especially the older two, the ambulance part of my life, the religious upbringing, are always there. I have very vivid memories. If I could just close my eyes for 5 seconds and start seeing things, kind of diving deep down into my deepest thoughts or something. I don't know.
Now to like delve into your new album that's coming out, I'm super freaking excited for it. On April 12th, the Flenzer's going to be releasing Trust Ruins. Super excited about this, man. With the songs for this album and the themes that you're looking to explore, is it still like same types of themes based upon, religious background, your experience with, seeing traumatic shit during your time as an EMT or paramedic, or is it an exploration to maybe some different types of themes or emotions?
There's some of that in there for sure. Just like how there always will be, I think. I feel like with the most recent one, though, Trust Ruins, the word trust kept popping into my head. There was a lot happening at the time. Like that record was written between 2017 and 18, like July to July, something like that. Maybe there was 2 demos beforehand, but there was definitely more of like a common thing there, or a theme. But that word just kept popping up in my head. Like I feel like every time I close my eyes, I have this problem anyway, but there's just so much there all the time. It's like TV's like a TV store, and you're looking through the front window. It's like an old, not a Radio Shack, something like that. But there's just like 10 TVs playing different things, and that's like usually what's in my head. But at that time, I just kept seeing this word trust, and I saw a lot of like ruins. We had just come back from Europe for a second time, and I think we had visited some old Roman era ruins in Germany, in Triech, I think it's called. But it was just seeing stuff like that. It was just like popping up in my head. And with that word, with what I was dealing with in my life and certain relationships, and then all the other stuff that happened at the time too. At the end of 2016, the presidential election, there was the ghost ship fire in Oakland, and my wife's brother, died and had an overdose. And so there was like some real intense kind of feelings that kind of brought me back actually to maybe 8-10 years ago when I was on the ambulance. I had never felt, I thought I was like doing maybe better in my life. I was kind of like moving on, and I was learning. I kind of was getting away from being so desensitized. I was like working on like talking with humans and being more social, and thinking I'm kind of fitting in here. I'm not so awkward and calloused looking, and then this happened, and then it didn't make me become how I was before, but it was like the same feeling in my head of like this like weird, it was like I wanted to explode. Like there was just like this fear in my head with all those things happening. So there had to be, it was around the time when like you would think maybe we'd start writing another record, or I felt like I had to start writing something at least. And it was during that time, and I don't know what else could have happened. It was just something needed to come out of me, this cathartic thing. It was just, I needed to like express, because I was just like, felt like I was losing my mind. And I was starting to feel like I did when I was on the ambulance, like basically like I wanted to die and kill myself. And I just really wasn't interested in like living life anymore, because I just didn't value it as much. Didn't see like it had anything to offer. So I tried to hone that in a little bit, because my wife was encouraging me to just kind of pull myself through. And there was quite a bit.
Yeah, no, I find the name of the album super interesting. And what you're saying to me further intrigues me, how you're explaining it like seeing an old like fucking TV shop or electronics shop. Because when I saw the name of the album, in my mind, I'm starting to think, what does that title mean? And so for you, what do you try to impart on the audience and the listener with the name of that album and how it relates to those songs?
I was trying to help myself with the whole process. I don't know if you'll call it a grieving process, but everything was so doom and gloom, It was like this giant black cloud over the United States, over San Francisco. It just felt like there was this impending doom. So it was like a therapeutical way for me to deal with that. So I needed to get that out. I didn't care if anybody ever heard it. I had no idea if Flenser was interested in that. Luckily they were, but this one was just completely different. It was more focused, but I felt like I had to do it that way, make it more focused and kind of follow this theme of trust. And I didn't even have to dig that deep. There was just, I usually have a journal and I write stuff down all the time, or I have a dream and I wake up and I write something. It was just like tons of stuff. I was like flipping through pages and it was like all like kind of the same, similar like stories that are all based around the same thing. So it made sense, and I wanted to kind of put it together. There was less of me tapping into my stream of consciousness, and maybe on one or two songs I did, but I still tried to hone it in and make it more story-like. Yeah, it was this weird thing. I just felt like they were each more almost like short stories or dreams or something, But I had no idea how anybody would accept it. I didn't know if anybody was going to like it. It sounded a little bit different, or it was starting to, than some of the previous stuff. But so I didn't know, but I didn't care. And trust seemed like a strong word. It seemed like there was a lot of people around me dealing with trust issues, on small scale, micro and macro. So it was, yeah. I
read too that with this album, there's basically a full band accompanying you. And then I read that the lineup for All Your Sisters came to be, after you started working on the album, realizing that the sound needed a presence of a full band, and that you played a show last summer and you had Nicole Valoria on drums, Gilbert Flores on bass, and James Hammondtree on guitar. And so, now that you're playing with a full band, how is that experience different for you when you first started and it's just you, or maybe it's you and Mario? How's that differ now for you?
Well, I'll start back. I'll go back to last year in August. So I had been writing the songs. Everything was pretty much done. I had scheduled at least to start working in the studio at the Atomic Garden with Jack Shirley. So it was done. I had the idea of having a full band. I didn't know how the heck I was going to pull that off, or who knows, maybe no one would even be interested. But that was the idea. I was hoping that I could find somebody, or a few people that would be interested in working with me. And then things started happening once. Jonathan had asked, he said, "Hey, I know you're working on new material. AYS hasn't played a show in a while. Do you think you can pull something together for this Flenser showcase I have in August?" And I was like, But he was like encouraging, and I was like, this is probably time. All Your Sisters really hadn't done much in about 12 months or so. So it was kind of like this motivation to get things going, and to get them done quick. There really wasn't that much time. I think, I want to say he asked me 2.5 months out, 2 months maybe, and I was basically just asked my friends in San Francisco. It was kind of like they were throwing me a bone or something. They're like, yeah, we'll figure it out and let's play a show. It'd be fun. They were all super busy. They have in multiple bands, but we kind of made it work to where we could get some practices done and like a few weeks leading up to the show, and it was sounding good, so I just went with it. Didn't have to cancel anything. I didn't want to, but we pulled it together. It wasn't that lineup that you had mentioned. It was a different lineup. It was just mostly the friends that I knew in the area where I had worked. But I had a drummer, a guitar player. The person who's still from that lineup for that one show is Gilbert. He still plays in the band as bass player. And then after moving to LA, which I did like 2 days. This was already planned. It wasn't like some weird off the wall kind of thing. After that show, my wife and I moved to LA, and then once I was down here, I met Nicole through Gilbert, and Gilbert said, "Hey, Nicole just moved down there too. Maybe you both can, jam and see if there's something there." And then it worked out. And then through Nicole, I met James, was her friend from some previous bands, and that's how that all came together. And we've been practicing the last few months with this lineup that you just mentioned.
Nice. And so do you feel that having now a 4-piece band allows you to really cultivate a sound that you really want to hone in with all your sisters?
Yeah, I think it does help. I was prepared to play it solo, or there was some shows where it was just me and Gilbert kind of still figuring out these new ones, in the last like 6 months or so. It is helpful. Like I said, I wrote this record in a different mindset. I wasn't trying to, I didn't go in and record like a side A all the way through and then a side B and then say that, hey, this is what it's exactly going to sound like when we play live or whatever. This one I focused more on each song individually with the idea of the whole thing coming together. So, but when I was focusing, I kept adding, I had free will this time around. I feel like it was much more free will. I could kind of do whatever I wanted, and I wanted to make sure they got the right treatment or attention. So I kind of put a lot of thought into the songs, try to make them sound the way I had it in my head. And a lot of times just having one other person or just me or like envisioning myself on stage didn't make any sense. So there's a few songs on the album where there's different guitar parts and a piano part. So I would definitely have to have more than a couple people. So yeah, to answer your question, having James and Nicole and Gilbert on stage with me like definitely helps bring it more to the life that I saw in my head, at least.
That's awesome, man. I am super excited for that album to drop. I hope I get to see you guys play at some point, because I've not been able to see you guys play before, and I would love the opportunities to see you play, especially as a 4-piece. I think that'd be awesome.
For sure. It's been really fun. I'm excited to get out there and tour as much as possible. So I know you're in the East Coast, so I feel like we'll be there. Yeah. We'll be there this year for sure.
Nice. Yeah. And that Flenser showcase show, man, I saw, I remember seeing the announcement because it was you, Drowse, and Planning for Burial. And I was just like, shit, dude, I'm so jealous of all the people that get to see that show.
It was a fun one for sure.
So quickly, I saw that you are a Bukowski fan, and Charles Bukowski is one of my favorite authors. So I had to ask you, what's one of your favorite books of either his prose or his fiction?
Well, I was thinking about that. Mostly, I would say Bukowski kind of popped up maybe more in the early years of All Your Sisters, but it's actually been a while since I read Bukowski, but the ones that I quickly kind of gravitated to was Ham on Rye, I want to say was the first one, and then...
Yeah, same with me, man. That was my first one I read.
And It Just Feels Right. I don't think that's the exact title. Yeah, it was just really interesting. I don't know. I wasn't going through the same stuff, but I think a lot of people at the time with friends or whatever, we felt pretty lost and we were depressed and drank a lot. So it was hearing somebody like Bukowski was I wouldn't say motivating was the right word, or it was just kind of you nod your head, you're like, okay, yeah, life makes a little bit more sense, or
yeah,
we're not so like different, or this is not like that bad, or like this is just the way the real world is kind of, and we're just dealing with it in maybe similar ways. But I felt like he was pretty inspirational. I'd like to go back and reread those actually soon. But yeah, super interesting guy.
His poetry, his prose is fantastic. And it's like when I read his prose, just as you were saying, I find it to be super inspirational. And it almost kind of sucks because I can't find, I love his prose and his style of writing so much that a lot of other poets and authors of poetry just kind of don't do it for me the way that he does. Cause he's just got he can be really funny at times. He could be super freaking depressing, but then some of his poetry can be kind of like what you said, inspirational and uplifting, is kind of as weird as it sounds with his style of writing.
For sure. And especially his voice is amazing, and his cadence of speech, and kind of just the way he delivers everything's from his gut, and yeah, totally agree. There's definitely a couple sides to Bukowski. I think a lot of people maybe focus on some of the darker stuff or the more negative stuff. Surely that's probably what my parents would say, especially there was no way I was reading Bukowski in high school or something. That would have been contraband for sure.
I have to commend you because, when we were scheduling this, I was going through your Instagram and I saw a photo of you and your wife during your wedding day. And dude, your outfit was baller as hell, man. I was so impressed by your outfit. I had to show my wife. You were wearing like a scarf or like a kerchief. I don't know what it would be considered. And then it looked like, were you wearing like gilded or like gold tipped shoes?
No, they were silver tip. They were just tips. Yeah.
I was like, damn, man, this guy's got some style. Cause I definitely I wore like a more traditional like gray suit at my wedding. I'm like, man, this dude like totally balled out for his wedding.
Well, part of the thing too for that was I'm pretty close with my grandparents, and they were my grandmother's already passed away, but we got married just a year ago, and my grandparents were able to come, and I knew they really wanted to come. They were trying their hardest. And it was kind of like a nod to my grandfather. I thought he looked real sharp in his wedding photos, and I wanted to kind of like pay my respects. I could have had like a traditional tuxedo or whatever, but it was more of like his style, and I just wanted to roll with that. And it was fun. And those boot tips, come from the family. My aunt let me use those. So just like little things like that. It was just like really nice and kind of fun and cute to like add that into part of my life that's like starting fresh and new, having a nod to the old family history.
That's so cool, man. Like I said, I had to show my wife, and she was super impressed by your outfit. She's like, man, he looks awesome.
Well, thanks.
And then I always like to ask this question. So what have you been listening to lately?
I kind of have a mix of old and new, but I feel like the old stuff maybe is a little boring to bring up. But Lingua Ignota is pretty interesting to me.
Yeah, right. So good.
Yeah, awesome. And I just like the subject material is kind of up my alley.
Yeah, it's so like, oh my God, dude, her voice, like you said, the subject material, and it's like a mixture of metal and classical. Like it is absolutely brilliant what she's doing.
Yeah, all the piano parts and everything. And I've, with this last record, spent a bunch of time kind of focusing on piano, and maybe I'm going to add that more in the future. But I love hearing the mix of the two. Also, I would say the new Chasms record just came out, and so I've definitely been listening to that. It came out, we're recording this on Friday. It came out today, so just been around pretty quick. But yeah, I've checked that out, and we kind of have this group thread in the band, and we'll just like share stuff, or like, hey, I'm checking this out, or like, this is so cool, or whatever, or, hey, you remember when, blah, blah, blah. But we were talking briefly about Glenn Branca, and that he's like a huge, major importance to me. So I was kind of digging through some stuff, and was listening to Symphony No. 5. So yeah, he's kind of back into the rotation more, but he's always been on a lot of playlists, or he's close by to play. Eric Satie as well, old composer. So I guess there's two newer bands and two older piece of works.
Awesome, dude. You've got Trust Ruins coming out in April. Other than the new record, is there anything else that you've got planned in the coming weeks, coming months?
Well, mostly just focusing on getting this live thing going. We've got a show in Riverside in March I should know the date, March 14th I think it is, yeah, Thursday. And then there'll be more shows announced, but we'll be going on tour after the album's out, and plan on a bunch more tours. I feel like it's going to be a busy year, and it'll probably ramp up to an even busier year next year, maybe, if we're lucky. So yeah, just definitely working hard on a lot of things. So hopefully we can start just getting out there.
That's sweet, man. I hope Pittsburgh, New York City, Boston, Toronto, or like Buffalo, if you can make it to one of those spots, I'll make sure to come and see you guys play. Because yeah, like I said, I haven't gotten a chance to see you guys play yet, so I feel like that's something I need to make happen.
For sure, I think we can make that happen.
Fuck yeah!
I'll let you know.
If people want to stay up to date with you, the band, how can they do so?
I've been trying to be pretty good about making sure I update things. I would say Instagram and Facebook should have whatever new information comes out, show dates or new merch or whatever. Yeah, I'm on, there's a Twitter thing too. So all the social media stuff should have pretty much the same information. We're out there.
Sweet, man. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for sitting down and talking with me. It was a great conversation, man. Had a lot of fun speaking with you. And dude, I am like super excited about the new album.
Me too. Thank you, Dan, for having me.
And there you have it, man. Really interesting individual. Really enjoyed my conversation with Jordan. When Jordan was sharing his experiences as an EMT and delving into his time being in San Francisco and being unemployed, man, I could really feel the inner turmoil in his voice when he was sharing those stories with me. I'm sure those are definitely periods of his life that are tough to think about or dwell on, or at least experiences that are tough to dwell on. And so I appreciated that he was willing to discuss those with me. Anytime you have a conversation with someone and they talk about, you know, being depressed, feeling suicidal, that's heavy. And so I feel fortunate enough that Jordan was willing to talk about that stuff with me and share those thoughts, those feelings and those experiences. I'm really excited for All Your Sister's new release, Trust Ruins. And I hope at some point in the next year, as Jordan and I had talked, that he'll make his way to the East Coast, because I would love to be able to see them play and to see them play some songs off the new album. So I'll make sure to add links in the show notes to how you can follow Jordan, keep up with All Your Sisters and what they've got going on, how you could pre-order Trust Ruins from Flenser. Make sure to get on top of that. And then as always, you know, make sure to follow the show, subscribe if you can, because that is super appreciated. You guys are the shit. You know the drill. Get out there, create something cool. I will see you next time.